The third volley ripped through our formation before I could even finish giving the order to bank starboard. I watched the tactical hollow above my command chair, as the icons representing the Tasari dreadnought constellation of peace split into two pieces, each half spinning away from the other, in a slow, terrible ballet of decompression clouds and escaping atmosphere. 6,000 Tasari crew, gone in the time it took me to draw a single breath. The hollow painted each fragment in cooling blue as the heat signatures faded, and I sat there watching a warship that had taken 9 years to build come apart like a toy dropped from a balcony. My name is Vorath Senai. I am Fleet Commander of the Kalori Dominion's 7th Combined Strike Group, and on that day above the colony world of Selurus 4, I was watching us lose a war. Commander, the Veen corvette screen is collapsing on the eastern flank. My tactical officer called from his station, his voice climbing towards something close to panic. His fingers were moving across his console so fast that his hands blurred, pulling up data feeds and threat assessments that refreshed every 2 seconds and got worse every time. 17 contacts converging on the frigate Silkwind. She is taking fire from 3 directions. I could see it on the hollow. The Dravik bioships moved like a disease, spreading through clean water. They were not elegant. They were not beautiful. They were dark, wet, pulsing things the size of city blocks, wrapped in organic armor that could regenerate faster than our weapons could tear it apart. Their hulls glistened under the light of the local star, slick and membranous, studded with bony protrusions that housed acid projectors and spore launchers, and a dozen other biological weapons that our scientists still did not fully understand. And there were thousands of them. Our long-range scans had counted 9,200 individual bioships when they first entered the Selurus system. We had killed perhaps 300 in the fighting so far. It had cost us a third of our combined fleet to do it. Order the Silkwind to fall back, I said, keeping my voice flat and controlled even though my pulse was hammering in my throat. A commander's voice is a weapon. If I let it shake, the entire bridge would shake with it. All Veen corvettes, disengage and regroup at Rally Point 7. Commander, the Veen War Elder is refusing the withdrawal order. He says his ships will hold the line. I pressed my palm flat against the armrest of my chair, hard enough to feel the metal edges dig into my skin. The Veen were brave and about to be dead. Their corvettes were fast and well-armed for their size, nimble little warships that could dance between enemy fire and deliver punishing strikes at close range. But against a swarm that could simply absorb losses and keep coming, speed and firepower meant nothing. You cannot outrun a flood, and you cannot shoot an ocean. Get me War Elder Duushan on direct channel. The holo flickered, and the broad, scarred face of the Veen commander appeared. Behind him, I could see his bridge shaking, damage alarms flashing amber and red across alien consoles. A support beam had come loose from the ceiling, and was hanging at an angle, swaying with each impact against the hull. Duushan himself showed no reaction to any of it. The old warrior sat in his command harness, like he had been carved from stone. Duushan, pull your corvettes back. You are losing ships for no tactical gain. Every ship we lose here is a ship that is not reaching the colony, Vorath. His deep voice rumbled through the translator, each word carrying the weight of decades of command experience, and a stubbornness that bordered on geological. There are 11 million civilians on that world. Mothers, children, people who have never fired a weapon in their lives. And if your entire screen is destroyed in the next 20 minutes, there will be nothing between those civilians and the swarm. You are spending lives to buy minutes. Fall back, regroup. That is not a request. He stared at me for a long moment, mandibles working beneath his chin armor, the scarred ridges of his face deepening as he clenched his jaw. Then he gave a sharp nod and cut the channel. On the holo, I watched the surviving Veen corvettes begin to pull away from the eastern engagement zone, harried every meter by Dravik bioships that latched onto their engine trails like parasites, nipping at their shields, trying to drag them back into the killing field. Commander Sensai. The voice belonged to High Admiral Tessara of the Tessari Concordance. Her holographic image materialized beside my chair, tall and luminous, her silver-white features betraying nothing. The Tessari were masters of composure. Their entire culture was built around the idea that emotion was a private experience, never to be inflicted upon others. Even now, with her fleet's flagship torn in half and drifting, with thousands of her crew dead in the cold vacuum, she looked as if she were attending a diplomatic reception. I am ordering a full evacuation of the Solaris 4 civilian population. All available transports will begin loading immediately. The transports will not make it, I said. We have run the projections, Admiral. Even at maximum loading speed, packing every transport bay to the bulkheads, it will take 14 hours to evacuate the major population centers. The Dravek will break through our defensive perimeter in 6. Any transport that launches will be caught in open space, with no escort capability. They will be slow, they will be defenseless, and the swarm will consume them at leisure. Then what do you suggest, Commander? That we stand here and die alongside them? That we add our corpses to the count? I am suggesting we find another option. There are no other options. For the first time, I heard something crack in her composure. It was small, just a hairline fracture in that perfect Tasari calm. The slightest tremor at the edge of a syllable, but I heard it. The Kaylori Second Fleet is 9 days away at maximum FTL. The Galactic Council Emergency Response Force is 12 days away. Our ammunition reserves are at 40% and falling. Our shield generators are running past their thermal limits. We have hours, Vorath, not days. Hours. She was right. I knew she was right, and I hated her for making me acknowledge it out loud. Every tactical simulation my officers had run came back the same color. Red. Total fleet loss within 40 hours. Colony overrun within 48. The Dravek did not conquer worlds the way other hostile species did. They did not enslave populations or install puppet governments or strip mine resources. They consumed. They stripped the biomass down to bare rock, fed every living thing into their bioship nurseries, converted flesh and forest and ocean into more of themselves. Solaris 4 had 11 million people, vast agricultural plains, deep oceans teeming with aquatic life, and forests that covered entire continents. To the Dravek, that was not a civilization. It was a meal. I ordered a tactical retreat to a fallback position, behind the larger of Solaris 4's 2 moons. The moon's bulk would break the swarm's sensor lock on our formation and force them to approach along predictable vectors. It bought us a few hours of breathing room while the Dravek swarm reorganized and began its slower approach. My crew used the time to patch hull breaches, redistribute power from non-essential systems to failing shield arrays, and count the dead. The count took a long time. It always does when the numbers are bad enough. I was alone in my command quarters when Lieutenant Rethis found me. Rethis was young for a Kaylori officer, barely past his second maturity, still carrying the lanky frame and oversized eyes of early adulthood. But he had a mind like a blade, and a habit of thinking around corners that more experienced officers had long since stopped noticing were there. I had pulled him from a signals intelligence posting 6 months ago because he could see patterns in data that others missed, and he had repaid that trust by being reliably, infuriatingly right about things I wished he were wrong about. Commander, I need to show you something. If it is another projection model, I have seen enough red for one day, Lieutenant. It is not a projection. He set a data tablet on my desk and stepped back, clasping his hands behind him, in the way junior officers do when they know they are about to cross a line and want to at least look respectful while doing it. On the screen was a file I had not seen in years. It was buried deep in the classified archives, locked behind encryption protocols that required my personal command cipher to access. Rethis had not opened it. He had simply brought it to the surface, like a diver pulling something dark and heavy up from the bottom of a deep ocean. The file header read, Emergency Mercenary Contact Protocol, Species Designation H7, Authorization Level Tier 0, Galactic Council Restricted. Species Designation H7. Humans. No, I said. Commander, every simulation ends the same way. Every single one. We lose. The colony falls. 11 million people die. I have run it 400 times with every variable I can adjust, and there is no combination of tactics, reinforcements, timing, or miracles that changes the outcome with the forces we have available. I have exhausted every possibility except this one. I said no, Rethis. You said no because you are afraid. I am afraid too. Everyone on this ship is afraid, but I would rather be afraid of what we might invite into this system than be certain of what happens if we do not. I stared at him. He held my gaze without flinching, those 2 large eyes steady and clear, not challenging, but not backing down either. Brave boy. Foolish, but brave. The kind of bravery that either gets you promoted or gets you killed, and the universe rarely tells you which one it will be until it is too late to change course. "Leave the tablet," I said quietly, "and get out." He left. I sat in the dim light of my quarters and stared at that file header for a very long time. Through the viewport behind my desk, I could see the curve of the moon, gray and pocked with ancient craters, and beyond it, the distant glow of Cellurus 4's atmosphere. City lights twinkling on the night side like scattered jewels. 11 million lives going about their evening routines, putting children to bed, cleaning up after meals, talking to loved ones over communication links, trusting, without even thinking about it, that the fleet above their heads would keep them safe. I thought about the exclusion accords. I thought about what had happened the last time humans were allowed to operate freely in galactic space. I thought about the reports I had read as a junior officer, classified briefings delivered in secured rooms with armed guards at the doors, briefings that described what a single human mercenary company had done to the Sirketh Empire in 11 days. Not defeated, not conquered, dismantled, taken apart like a child pulling the legs off an insect, systematically and completely, and with a calm efficiency that had made every species in the galactic community step back and reassess what exactly they had been sharing their galaxy with. The Sirketh had hired the humans to handle a border dispute, a small job, a limited engagement. The humans had complied with their contract perfectly until they discovered that the Sirketh were using them as a spearhead for an ethnic cleansing campaign against a defenseless border population. The humans had asked the Sirketh to stop. The Sirketh had laughed. 11 days later, the Sirketh Empire no longer existed as a functioning political entity. Its military was scattered. Its government had collapsed. Its emperor had fled to a neutral system and begged for asylum, and the humans had let him go because they had already made their point. The council had voted unanimously after that. Humans were to be quarantined in their home systems, cut off from galactic FTL networks, monitored by long-range observation stations, contained, not because they had committed any crime against galactic law, but because the council looked at what humans were capable of, looked at the long and bloody history of their species, at the wars they had fought among themselves for millennia before they ever reached the stars, and decided that some things were too dangerous to leave uncontained. 40 years of silence. 40 years of humans sitting in their little corner of the galaxy, doing whatever humans did when they were left alone, building, breeding, preparing for something, or nothing, or everything. And in all that time, the classified contact frequency had remained in the archives, gathering dust, a last resort that no one ever wanted to use, because using it meant admitting that the walls the galaxy had built were not as strong as it pretended. I opened the file. Inside was a single subspace frequency, a brief communication protocol, and a warning stamped in red text across every page. Deployment of H7 assets constitutes acceptance of uncontrolled tactical escalation. The Galactic Council assumes no responsibility for collateral outcomes. I activated my personal communicator, encrypted the channel, routed it through 3 backup signal relays to ensure it would reach its destination, even through the interference of a system filled with Dravik bioship emissions, and transmitted the signal before I could think about it long enough to stop myself. The response came faster than I expected. A burst of static, a brief handshake tone, and then silence. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. 2 minutes. My fingers were gripping the edge of my desk hard enough to leave marks in the composite surface. Then a voice. Human. Female. Calm, with a thread of something that might have been amusement running beneath the surface, like a river flowing under ice. Well, 40 years of nothing, and now someone finally picks up the phone. I was starting to think you all had lost our number. My throat tightened. This is Fleet Commander Vorath Senai of the Kaelori Dominion 7th Combined Strike Group. I am invoking emergency contact protocol under Tier 0 authorization. I know what you are invoking, Commander. The question is whether you know what you are asking for. I looked out the viewport at those distant city lights one more time. 11 million points of warmth in the cold dark of space. 11 million reasons. I know exactly what I am asking for, I said, and I am asking anyway. The hours after I sent the signal were the longest of my life, and I have lived through 3 wars. I told no one at first. I returned to the bridge, took my command chair, and ran the fleet through another round of defensive preparations as if nothing had changed. as if I had not just reached across 40 years of silence and rung a bell that the entire galaxy had agreed should never be rung again. We repositioned our remaining capital ships into a tighter defensive sphere around the moon. We deployed sensor buoys along the predicted approach corridors of the Dravik swarm, creating an early warning network that would give us perhaps 30 additional seconds of notice before the next attack. We transferred wounded between ships and consolidated ammunition stores that were already running dangerously low. Every action precise, every order calm. The perfect image of a fleet commander managing a difficult tactical situation. No one needed to know that my hands were trembling beneath the armrests. But the swarm did not give us time to breathe. 14 hours after our retreat behind the moon, the Dravik pushed forward again, tendrils of bioships probing our flanks like blind fingers searching for a gap in armor. I lost 2 more frigates in the first skirmish, both Kalori vessels, both ships I had served alongside for years. The frigate Starward Oath went down fighting, her captain broadcasting tactical data to the fleet, even as his hull broke apart around him, flames and debris spiraling away from the dying ship, while his weapons kept firing in precise, measured bursts until the power finally failed. The other, the Quiet Reach, simply vanished from the hollow between one sensor sweep and the next, consumed so quickly by a concentrated swarm cluster that there was not even debris left to mark where she had been. One moment a ship, the next, nothing. High Admiral Tessara contacted me again as the second wave pressed against our perimeter. Her composure had returned, but it was thinner now, a shell over something desperate, like glass stretched too thin to hide the darkness behind it. My government has authorized a full withdrawal from the Soluris system, Commander. We will take as many civilians as we can carry in our warships, but we cannot remain here. I am ordering my remaining ships to break formation and make for open space within the hour. Your ships will be run down before they clear the system's gravity well, I said. You know this, Admiral. The swarm is faster than your cruisers at sublight speed, and you cannot engage FTL drives this deep in the system's gravity field. They will catch you in open space, and your ships will die tired instead of fighting. Then at least we die moving. At least we die trying. That is preferable to waiting here for the inevitable. There is another option. You keep saying that, Commander, and yet you never tell me what it is. I took a breath. I had been carrying this alone for 14 hours, and the weight of it had been growing heavier with every minute, pressing down on my chest like a physical burden. It was time. I opened a command channel to all Allied vessels. Every captain, every admiral, every officer on every bridge in the fleet heard my voice at once. All commands, this is Fleet Commander Vorath Senai. 6 hours ago, I transmitted an emergency contact signal under Tier 0 authorization to a human mercenary force. They have responded. They are en route. Estimated arrival is within 4 hours. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the hum of my own ship's life support systems in the void where voices should have been. I could hear my own heartbeat. I could hear Rethus, standing at his station behind me, exhale slowly through his teeth. Then the channel erupted. High Admiral Tessara's voice cut through first, sharp as a blade drawn across stone. You did what, Commander? The exclusion accords explicitly prohibit contact with human military assets, under any circumstances short of an existential threat to the galactic community as a whole. A single colony system does not meet that threshold, regardless of the civilian population count. You have violated interstellar law. You have violated your own commission. This will end your career. 11 million people meet my threshold, Admiral. If the law disagrees, then the law is wrong. This is not about your threshold. This is about the stability of galactic order. The accords exist because the last time humans operated without restriction, they dismantled an empire. An entire civilization, Commander. Gone in 11 days. The Surketh earned what they received, and I would rather explain my decision to a court-martial than explain to 11 million ghosts why I followed a protocol instead of saving their lives. War Elder Dushan's voice came through next, and it carried a weight that silenced even Tessara. The old Vihun warrior spoke slowly, each word placed with the care of someone setting stones on a grave. Then may the gods forgive us all, because what comes through that rift will answer to no god I have ever known. The fleet settled into a grim, anxious silence after that. Some captains sent me private messages of support, short and carefully worded, to avoid being logged as endorsements in case the political winds shifted. Others sent formal protests that would be recorded in the fleet archive for whatever tribunal awaited me. I read none of them. I had made my choice. Now I had to live long enough for it to matter. The Dravek hit us again 3 hours before the humans were due to arrive. This assault was different from the probing attacks before. This was a full commitment, the entire forward mass of the swarm surging toward our defensive sphere, in a wave of dark, pulsing biomass that blotted out the stars behind it. On the holo, the mass of red contacts was so dense that it looked like a solid wall moving toward us, a living barrier of hunger and malice stretching from one edge of the sensor range to the other. We fought with everything we had left. The Kailori battlecruiser Forge of Dawn absorbed 9 direct impacts from Dravik acid projectors before her captain, a veteran named Senna Vosk, vented her forward compartments to space to extinguish the biological corrosion eating through her hull plating, then turned her ship broadside and kept firing with every weapon that still functioned, her hull trailing vapor and debris like blood from an open wound. The Vihan destroyer pack, led by Dushan himself, executed a slashing attack through the swarm's left flank, his ships moving in tight formation, their weapons creating overlapping fields of fire that carved a corridor of destruction through the bioship ranks, buying us 20 precious minutes of reduced pressure on our center. Even the Tasari, despite their admiral's fury at my decision, fought with cold precision, their beam weapons cutting surgical lines through the swarm's densest clusters, every shot placed with mathematical accuracy. But it was not enough. It was never going to be enough. The swarm was too large, too relentless, too capable of absorbing punishment and regenerating faster than we could inflict it. For every bioship we killed, 3 more pushed forward to take its place. Our ammunition reserves dropped below critical thresholds. Our shield generators began failing from sustained thermal overload, their housings glowing cherry red on the external hull cameras. The Forge of Dawn, battered beyond recognition, finally lost main power and began drifting, her crew evacuating in escape pods that the swarm ignored because they were too small to be worth consuming. I was calculating how many minutes we had left, running the numbers in my head because the computer's projection had simply returned a red screen with no timeline, when my communications officer straightened in his chair with an expression I had never seen on a Kailori face before. It was not relief. It was not hope. It was something closer to awe, mixed with a kind of primal unease that went deeper than training or discipline or years of service could reach. Commander, subspace rift forming, bearing 047, Mark 12, range 600,000 kilometers. The holo shifted to show the rift. It was small by the standards of galactic FTL travel, a tight, controlled tear in the fabric of normal space that pulsed with blue-white energy. No excess radiation, no gravitational distortion. A clean puncture, in and out, like a needle through fabric. Through it came ships. 4 ships. Every officer on my bridge turned to look at me. I could read the same thought on every face, in every pair of eyes, in the slight parting of lips and the unconscious shake of heads. 4 ships against 9,000. The human vessels were nothing like anything in the galactic registry. They were not sleek or symmetrical, or designed according to any aesthetic principle I could identify. They were blocky, angular, brutish machines, covered in what appeared to be layers of welded armor plating, stacked on top of each other like the scales of some industrial reptile. Scorch marks and patched hull breaches covered their surfaces, evidence of battles fought long before this one, wounds that had been sealed but never properly healed. Mismatched weapon turrets jutted from their hulls at irregular intervals, each one a different design, a different caliber, as if the ships had been armed from a dozen different arsenals. They looked like they had been built in a junkyard by someone who cared about nothing except making sure they could take a beating and keep moving forward. The lead ship was the largest, though still smaller than any of our capital ships. It broadcast on an open channel, no encryption, no diplomatic preamble, no identification protocol, just a flat, clear transmission that every vessel in the system received simultaneously. Attention all vessels, humans on the field, clear grid sectors 7 through 15 immediately. Anything remaining in those sectors in 90 seconds will be treated as hostile. You have been warned. I relayed the order to the fleet without hesitation. Ships scrambled to clear the designated sectors, pulling back from engagement zones that overlapped with the grid coordinates the humans had claimed. Some of my captains protested, sending urgent messages about giving up hard-won positions, about tactical disadvantage, about the absurdity of ceding territory to 4 ships. I cut every one of them off. I did not have time to explain something I did not fully understand myself. The woman's voice returned on my private channel. Corbin. She had given me no rank, no title, no family name, just Corbin. Commander Senai, my compliments on still being alive. I owe your Lieutenant Rethus a drink for having the nerve to pull that file. I blinked. You know my lieutenant? I know everyone who has ever accessed that contact file, Commander. I have alerts set on every layer of its encryption. There have been 14 attempts to open it in 40 years. Yours is the first one that was not cancelled before the signal cleared the encryption buffer. Everyone else got scared and pulled the plug. Either you are very brave or very desperate. Both, I said. Good. Brave and desperate is exactly what we work with. Now I need you to do something for me, Commander. I need you to watch what happens next. And remember it clearly. Every detail. Every moment. Because when this is over, the politicians and the lawyers and the committee members who have never fired a weapon in their lives are going to want to know exactly what their money bought. And I would rather have a credible witness than a pile of sensor logs that some bureaucrat can argue about for the next decade. What are you going to do with 4 ships? There was a pause. When she spoke again, I could hear her smiling. Not a warm smile. Something sharper. Something that had edges. Something no one has let us do for 40 years, Commander. Our jobs. The 4 human ships accelerated. Not toward the edges of the swarm. Not toward isolated targets or weakened flanks. Or the kind of carefully chosen engagement points that any sane tactical doctrine would recommend. They drove straight into the thickest, densest concentration of Dravik bioships, like 4 fists punching into the heart of a living storm. Their engines flared so bright that my sensors had to adjust their filters, and they hit the swarm at a velocity that should have been suicidal. And the swarm, for the first time since it had entered the Silurus system, reacted with something that looked like surprise. I have commanded warships for 32 years. I have studied the tactics of every major species in the galactic community. I have read accounts of battles stretching back thousands of years across dozens of civilizations, from the elegant maneuver warfare of the Tessari, to the brutal close-quarters doctrine of the Vinin, to the patient siege strategies of the Pelari hegemony. I thought I understood what combat looked like in all its forms. I did not understand anything until I watched 4 human ships fight. The 4 vessels hit the swarm in a diamond formation, their drives burning so hot that my sensors registered their engine output as equivalent to small stars. The Dravik bioships closest to their entry point tried to converge, tried to do what they always did, overwhelm through sheer numbers, smother the enemy in living mass. The swarm's coordination was its greatest weapon. Thousands of individual organisms, linked through a hive mind network, moving as one, thinking as one, reacting as one. It was what made them so devastating. No individual bioship was particularly dangerous, but 9,000 of them, moving with a single intelligence behind their actions, were an unstoppable force. The humans broke that coordination in the first 90 seconds. I did not understand how at first. I watched the holo as the 4 human ships split from their diamond into individual attack runs, each one carving a different path through the swarm. They did not fight the way galactic species fought. They did not form battle lines. They did not maintain defensive formations. They did not concentrate fire on priority targets. They did not hold position or establish kill zones or do any of the things that every tactical manual I had ever read said were essential for survival in a fleet engagement. They seemed to be doing everything wrong, every single thing that 300 years of galactic military doctrine said would get you killed. The lead human ship, the one Corbin was commanding, dove directly toward a cluster of Dravik bioships that my sensors identified as a coordination node. These were the hive mind relay organisms, the ones that transmitted commands from the central intelligence to the individual bioships. Kill a relay node, and the bioships in its network lose coordination for a few seconds before the hive mind reroutes through another node. We had learned this early in the war. We had tried targeting relay nodes ourselves. The problem was that the swarm always protected them with layers of sacrificial bioships, rings of expendable organisms that would throw themselves into our weapons fire to absorb the damage before it reached the relay. By the time you fought through the defenders, the relay had already been moved to a new position deeper inside the swarm. Corbin did not fight through the defenders. She flew past them. Her ship screamed through the swarm at a velocity that should have made precision targeting impossible. unleashing weapons I had never seen before. Not energy beams or plasma bolts. Physical projectiles, thousands of them, spraying in calculated patterns that turned the space around her ship into a corridor of shrapnel. The projectiles were not aimed at the relay node. They were aimed at everything else. Every bioship in a sphere around the relay was shredded, torn apart, reduced to clouds of organic debris that tumbled away into the void. And then, as Corbin's ship passed the exposed relay node, a single focused beam lanced out from her vessel's underside and cut the node cleanly in half. The effect was immediate and dramatic. 200 Dravik bioships in the surrounding volume stopped moving in unison, their coordinated attack patterns dissolving into confused, individual behavior. Some of them turned on each other, unable to distinguish friend from foe without the relay signal telling them which organisms were allies. Others simply drifted, inert, waiting for commands that were no longer coming, like soldiers whose officers had all been killed at once. But it was the second human ship that showed me something that made my blood run cold. The vessel, which my sensors tagged as the Gallows Humor, based on a hull identification broadcast, had broken away from the formation and was flying a seemingly random pattern through the swarm's outer layers. It was not engaging. It was not firing. It was just flying, weaving between bioships, letting them chase it, drawing more and more of the swarm into pursuit, like a creature dragging a trail of scent through a forest full of predators. Then the mines detonated. I had not seen the Gallows Humor deploy them. My sensors had not detected them. No energy signature, no mass anomaly, no deployment mechanism that our instruments could identify. But they were there, hundreds of them, seated along the ship's flight path in the minutes since it had entered the swarm, dropped like breadcrumbs behind a running figure. They were not conventional mines. They did not explode with force or energy. They released something, a cloud of particles that spread through the local volume of space and clung to every Dravik bioship they touched. And then the particles activated. The bioships began to spasm. Their organic hulls rippled and contorted, membranes stretching and distorting in ways that looked painful, even to something that might not feel pain. Their weapons fired wildly in every direction, striking their own swarm mates, cutting through allied bioships with the same acid and spore weapons that had been tearing our fleet apart hours earlier. Their propulsion systems flared and died, and flared again, in uncontrolled bursts that sent them spinning into collisions with each other, crashing together in tangles of ruptured organic material. Whatever the humans had put in those mines was attacking the Dravik nervous system from the outside, disrupting the electrochemical signals that controlled their biological functions. "What is that?" my tactical officer whispered, staring at the hollow, as an entire sector of the swarm dissolved into screaming chaos. I did not answer because I did not know, and because I was beginning to understand something fundamental about human warfare that I wished I did not have to understand. Galactic species fought wars to win battles. We maneuvered for position. We concentrated fire. We sought decisive engagements where superior force could be brought to bear on an inferior enemy. It was structured. It was logical. It was the way civilized beings conducted warfare. Humans did not fight to win battles. They fought to break the enemy's ability to fight at all. Every move, every weapon, every seemingly reckless tactic was aimed not at destroying Dravik bioships, but at destroying the systems that allowed the Dravik to function as a coordinated force. They were not fighting the swarm. They were dismantling it from the inside out, like surgeons cutting nerves instead of limbs. The third human ship, designated Pretty Penny on my sensors, had positioned itself near a dense cluster of bioships and was broadcasting something on a frequency my communications officer had to recalibrate 3 times before he could even detect it. It was not a weapon in any traditional sense. It was a signal, a complex modulated transmission that mimicked the Dravik hive mind relay pattern. A false command signal, crafted so precisely that the Dravik bioships could not distinguish it from genuine hive mind orders. And the bioships around it were responding, breaking away from the main swarm, following the false commands into formations that left them isolated, confused, and vulnerable, clustering together in dense groups that had no tactical purpose and no connection to the real hive mind network. "They are turning the swarm against itself," War Elder Dushan said over the command channel. His voice was barely a whisper, raw with something that might have been admiration or might have been horror. "They have found a way to speak the enemy's language and use it as a weapon." The fourth human ship, the Tuesday afternoon, was doing something I could not even categorize. It had attached itself to the largest Dravik bioship in the immediate area, a massive organism the size of a small moon that served as a mobile hive nest, a breeding platform that could produce new bioships from consumed biomass. The human ship had fired grappling tethers into the bioship's hull and was riding it like a parasite attached to a host, using the bioship's own bulk as a shield against fire from the rest of the swarm. And through the tethers, the human crew was doing something to the organism's internal structure. I watched on the holo as the hive nest's movement patterns began to change, its course shifting, its weapons powering down one by one. The humans were not just disrupting the hive mind, they were hijacking individual organisms, taking direct control of a creature that weighed more than my entire flagship. 30 minutes into the engagement, the swarm's cohesion was shattered across an entire hemisphere of the battle space. Bioships that had moved in perfect coordination now drifted in confused clusters, firing at shadows, colliding with each other, turning their acid projectors on their own swarm mates, or simply going dark as their neural networks overloaded with conflicting signals. The humans had not destroyed 9,000 bioships. They had made 9,000 bioships destroy themselves. And then Corbin's ship took a hit. It was not a small hit. A Dravik acid projector, one of the swarm's heavy weapons designed to melt through capital ship armor, struck her vessel amidships and burned through the welded armor plating like fire through dry leaves. I watched on the holo as an entire section of her ship simply ceased to exist, replaced by a cloud of vaporized metal and escaping atmosphere that bloomed outward in a silent, expanding sphere. Her engine output dropped by half. Her weapons fire stuttered and went intermittent, turrets losing power and going dark one after another. Warning indicators cascaded across the sensor readout, each one representing a system failure that would have been catastrophic on its own. On any Kalori ship, that level of damage would trigger an immediate withdrawal to safe distance for emergency repairs. Standard doctrine, survival protocol. The obvious, rational, sane response. Corbin accelerated. She pointed her crippled ship directly at the largest Dravik coordination node in the sector, a massive relay organism surrounded by a shell of defensive bioships, and she accelerated to a velocity that my tactical officer later calculated was just below the threshold that would tear her ship apart from structural stress alone. Her remaining engines burned white-hot, pouring everything they had left into one final burst of speed. "Commander Senche," she said, over the private channel, her voice tight but steady, controlled in the way that only someone who has accepted what is about to happen can be. "I am about to do something dramatic. Please do not let it go to waste." Her ship hit the coordination node head-on. The collision was spectacular, a bloom of energy and debris, and vaporized organic matter that lit up the holo like a second sun, the shockwave sending nearby bioships tumbling end over end. But in the instant before impact, my sensors detected a burst of escape pods launching from her vessel's aft section. 12 pods, each one burning hard on its own micro-engines, scattering into the swarm like seeds thrown from a dying flower, and each pod was broadcasting the same false hive mind signal that the Pretty Penny had been using, drawing bioships toward them, pulling the swarm apart in 12 different directions, multiplying the chaos exponentially. The coordination node shattered. 400 more bioships lost their connection to the hive mind simultaneously. The chaos spread like a wave through the surrounding swarm, each disconnected cluster of bioships adding to the confusion, their panicked individual behavior disrupting the movements of still coordinated neighbors, the disorder cascading outward like cracks spreading through broken glass. I made my decision in the space between two heartbeats. All Allied ships, advance. Full offensive engagement. Target disorganized swarm elements. Do not enter the grid sectors the humans have designated as their operational zones. High Admiral Tessara's voice cut in immediately, sharp and furious. "Commander, this is reckless beyond measure. We should hold position and preserve what remains of our forces while the humans spend themselves against the swarm. The humans are giving us an opening that will not last, Admiral. Every second we wait, the hive mind is rerouting, rebuilding command links, restoring coordination. We advance now and exploit the chaos, or we waste everything they are paying for with their blood. All ships, forward, now." The Allied fleet surged out from behind the moon, like a wave breaking over a dam. Kalori battlecruisers, their weapons recharged during the defensive pause, opened fire on the confused swarm elements closest to our perimeter, their guns blazing in sustained volleys that tore through bioships too disoriented to dodge or defend. Veen destroyers, fast and furious, swept through the gaps the humans had torn in the swarm's formation, targeting the drifting bioships that had lost their connection to the hive mind, picking off easy kills that would have been deadly threats minutes before. Even the Tasari ships joined the advance, their beam weapons cutting clean lines through clusters of disoriented enemies with the same cold precision they brought to everything. For 20 glorious, terrible minutes, we carved through the Dravek swarm like surgeons through diseased tissue, destroying hundreds of bioships that could not coordinate a defense, could not form protective clusters, could not even identify which direction the fire was coming from. The tide had turned. Not gently, not gradually. It had turned like a river hitting a dam, all at once, violent and total and irreversible. Then Corbin's voice came through again on the private channel. She was aboard the Pretty Penny now, picked up by the third human ship after her escape pod had been scooped out of the debris field by a retrieval drone. She was breathing hard. I could hear pain in her voice, a tightness in her words that told me she was injured, and trying hard to hide it, and mostly failing. Sinai, listen to me carefully. The swarm is fragmenting, but it will reorganize if the primary hive mind node stays active. There is a queen brain behind the second moon of this planet. It is the central intelligence controlling the entire swarm, the mother node that every relay connects back to. My people have been mapping the hive mind signal topology since we arrived, tracing every command chain, and they all lead back to the same location. A single massive organism hidden behind that moon. Kill it, and the swarm dies permanently. Leave it alive, and everything we have done today buys you days, not victory. You have 3 ships left, Corbin. One of them is carrying escape pod survivors from your own vessel, people who are injured and exhausted. You cannot assault a defended position with that force. We can, we will. We do this kind of thing all the time. But I need you to hold the line here for 40 minutes while we circle the planet and hit the queen brain from the far side. Keep the swarm focused on your fleet. Keep them busy. Keep them looking at you instead of at us. Can you do that? 40 minutes. With a fleet that was already battered and bleeding, running on reserve ammunition and failing shield generators, against a swarm that, even in its fragmented state, still outnumbered us by thousands of individual bioships. I looked at the holo. I looked at Celeris 4, glowing blue and green below us, its cities still shining in the dark like a promise someone had made to the universe, and was still trying to keep. 40 minutes, I said. Go. We will hold. The 3 human ships broke away from the main engagement and burned hard toward the second moon, their engines flaring as they accelerated around the curve of the planet, disappearing from my sensor range within minutes, as the bulk of Celeris 4 blocked the line of sight. I watched them go with a feeling in my chest that I could not name. It was not hope, exactly. It was something older and less comfortable than hope. Trust, maybe. The kind of trust you place in someone not because you know they will succeed, but because you know they will try with everything they have, and will not stop until they either win or die. The Dravek swarm, sensing the departure of the ships that had been tearing it apart from the inside, began to reorganize with a speed that was frankly terrifying. The hive mind rerouted through secondary relay nodes, re-establishing command links to surviving bioships, pulling the scattered fragments back into coordinated formations. The chaos the humans had created began to fade like a fever breaking, replaced by the cold, efficient precision of the swarm's collective intelligence. Individual bioships that had been drifting inert suddenly powered up their weapons and engines, falling back into formation as the relay signals reached them. They came at us again, and this time there was something different in their movements, something I could only describe as anger, though I do not know if a hive mind can feel such things. I will not describe every minute of those 40 minutes. Some of them blur together even now, a smear of weapons fire and damage reports, and the screaming of overstressed hull plating, and the voices of officers relaying casualty counts that climbed higher with each passing second. I will tell you the moments that stand out, the ones that burned themselves into my memory so deeply that I can still see them when I close my eyes. I will tell you about Captain Lena Vosk of the Kaelori destroyer Grey Morning, who positioned her ship in the path of a swarm tendril that was breaking through our left flank and held her ground for 11 straight minutes, taking hit after hit, her hull burning, her crew sealing compartment after compartment as the ship died around them section by section. She refused 3 orders to withdraw. She told me that the gap she was holding was the only thing between the swarm tendril and a cluster of evacuating escape pods from the Forge of Dawn, and she was not going to let those pods die while she still had a gun that could fire. She survived. Barely. They pulled her out of her command chair with burns covering half her body, and she was still giving orders as they carried her to the medical bay on a stretcher. I will tell you about the Veen frigate Iron Song, whose captain, a young officer named Dira Kolm, realized that a cluster of Dravik bioships was making a run toward the planet's surface, bypassing our fleet entirely, heading straight for the northern continent where the largest civilian population centers were located. She broke formation without orders, without hesitation, without even informing her squadron leader, drove her frigate into the cluster's path at maximum speed, and detonated her ship's reactor core at point-blank range. The blast destroyed the entire cluster. 17 bioships converted into an expanding sphere of superheated plasma that dissipated harmlessly in the upper atmosphere. There were no survivors from the Iron Song. War Elder Dushan received the news in silence, bowed his great scarred head for exactly 3 seconds, and then returned to directing his remaining ships with a voice that did not waver once. I will tell you about the moment, 32 minutes into the hold, when my tactical officer turned to me with a face drained of color and said, "Commander, the Dravik are concentrating for a final push. All remaining swarm elements across the entire engagement zone are converging on a single attack vector. Estimated force concentration at point of impact, 4,000 bioships. If they hit our line as one force, it will not hold. We do not have the firepower to stop that many." I looked at the holo. He was right. The swarm was pulling itself together, gathering its thousands of surviving bioships into a single massive formation, aimed directly at the heart of our fleet, a battering ram of living biomass that would punch through our defensive line and scatter what remained of our ships like leaves in a storm. It was the kind of all-or-nothing assault that the Dravik used when they sensed victory was close, when the hive mind calculated that one overwhelming push would break the enemy's capacity to resist. "Time since the humans departed?" I asked. 34 minutes, Commander. 6 minutes. We needed 6 more minutes. And the largest swarm concentration we had faced all day was bearing down on us like an avalanche. I opened the fleet channel. All ships, Titan formation, maximum defensive density, concentrate all fire on the leading edge of the swarm advance. We do not need to stop them, we need to slow them down. 6 minutes. Give me 6 minutes, and I will give you a victory. I swear it on every life on that planet below us. The fleet responded. Every ship that could still fight turned its weapons toward the oncoming wave. The space between our formation and the swarm filled with energy beams, kinetic rounds, missiles, plasma bolts, and everything else our depleted arsenals could throw. A wall of fire that tore into the leading bioships and staggered the advance. The front rank of the swarm shattered, organisms breaking apart under the concentrated bombardment. The swarm pushed through the wreckage of its own dead. We poured more fire into it. It pushed through again. Closer. Closer. The gap between the swarm and our fleet shrinking with every second. 4 minutes remaining. 3. 2. And then the swarm stopped. Not slowed, not faltered. Stopped. Every Dravik bioship in the Silurus system stopped moving at exactly the same moment, as if someone had reached into the hive mind and flipped a switch from on to off. 9,000 organisms, frozen in place, their weapons going dark, their engines falling silent, their biological systems continuing to function on a basic level, but their coordinating intelligence, the vast network of signals and commands and collective purpose that made them a swarm instead of a collection of mindless animals, simply gone. The queen brain was dead. The silence on the bridge lasted 5 full seconds. Then my communications officer said, in a voice that shook with exhaustion, and something so close to wonder that it almost sounded like reverence, "Commander, incoming transmission from the human vessel Pretty Penny. Put it through." Corbin's voice filled the bridge. It was raw, stripped down to something bare and honest and human that she had not let me hear before. The polish was gone, the amusement was gone. What remained was a woman who had spent everything she had and was running on whatever comes after that. Target eliminated. The queen brain is dead. You can mop up the rest at your leisure. A pause. The sound of labored breathing. Each inhale sharp and painful. We lost the gallows humor and the Tuesday afternoon. Both ships, all hands. There was a defensive perimeter around the queen brain that was heavier than our scans indicated. Hundreds of Guardian bioships packed tight around it. The gallows humor drew their fire while the Tuesday afternoon made the kill run. Neither ship made it clear of the blast radius. I sat with that for a moment. 2 ships. The Gallows Humor, with its minefields, and its clever pilot, who had turned the swarm's pursuit instinct into a weapon. The Tuesday Afternoon, with its grappling tethers, and its crew who had hijacked a living warship. Gone. Perhaps 200 humans in total. People who had traveled across a galaxy that had locked them out, to fight and die for species that had voted to keep them caged. Corbin, I said, I do not have the words. Then do not use words, Commander. Use actions. Those bioships are going to start decomposing within hours, once the hive mind signal fully degrades. If your scientists want to study Dravic biology, now is the time to collect samples. And send some ships to check the colony's surface. The swarm may have seeded spore pods before we took out the queen. Each pod can restart a swarm if left to mature. Even now, even with her people dead and her ship battered and her body broken, she was thinking ahead, planning, working, moving forward. Because stopping, for a human, seemed to be something that happened only when the heart stopped beating. I gave the orders. The Allied fleet spread out through the system, methodically destroying the inert Dravic bioships. It felt less like a battle, and more like clearing wreckage after a storm. Some of my officers called it mercy, ending the mindless organisms before they suffocated in the vacuum without the hive mind to sustain their life functions. I was not sure the word applied to something that had never known individual thought. I was not sure it mattered. The Veen handled most of the surface sweep, their corvettes dropping into the atmosphere of Cellurus 4 to search for and neutralize any spore pods the swarm had launched before the Queen Brain's death. They found 17, each one buried in the soil of remote regions far from the population centers, already beginning the slow process of germination that would produce new bioships within months if left unchecked. Dushan's teams burned every one of them to ash, and then burned the ash for good measure. It was 9 hours after the Queen Brain's death when Corbin came aboard my flagship. I had offered to meet her on the Pretty Penny, but she refused, saying her ship was in no condition for guests, and that she did not want me to see the inside of it until the blood had been cleaned from the corridors. When I saw the Pretty Penny on close approach, I understood why she might want to spare me. The vessel looked like it had been chewed on by something enormous, and then spat back out. Entire hull sections were missing, exposing internal frameworks and conduit bundles to the vacuum. Temporary patches of what appeared to be raw metal sheeting covered the worst gaps, welded on with the rough, hurried craftsmanship of people who were fixing things while other things were trying to kill them. One of her engine nacelles was completely dark, and the other flickered with an unsteady light that suggested it was operating on backup systems and willpower. Corbin came through the airlock alone. She was shorter than I expected. Humans were small compared to Kalori, barely reaching the middle of my chest. But the size of her reputation had made me imagine someone larger. Someone whose physical presence matched the weight she carried in the galaxy's collective memory. She wore a battered flight suit stained with fluids I chose not to identify. Her left hand was wrapped in a medical bandage that was cleaner and more professional than the field dressing I had seen during the battle, but I could see clearly that 2 of her fingers were missing, the stumps sealed beneath the wrapping. Her face was bruised in 3 places, her left eye swollen half shut, and she walked with a limp that she had stopped trying to disguise. She looked at me with her one good eye and smiled. Not a big smile, a small one, tired and real. Commander Senai, good to meet you in person. You fight better than your tactical record suggested you would. You lost 2 ships and half your people to save a colony that is not yours, I said. I am trying to understand why. She reached into a pocket of her flight suit and pulled out a dented metal container that looked like it had been through as many battles as she had. She twisted the cap off with her uninjured hand, took a long drink of something that smelled sharp and chemical even from where I stood, and then leaned against the bulkhead beside the airlock as if she intended to stay there for a while. Can we discuss payment first? My surviving crew needs supplies, repair materials, and fuel. The Pretty Penny is not making it home without a new port engine, and the long weekend needs hull plating that we cannot fabricate ourselves. And I have 187 names that need to be recorded somewhere official, in some archive that will outlast both of us. They deserve that much. 187, I repeated. Crew of the Gallows Humor and the Tuesday Afternoon, plus my own people who did not make it to the escape pods in time. 64 on the Gallows Humor, 89 on the Tuesday Afternoon, 34 from my ship. She said the numbers without emotion. The way someone reads items off a supply manifest. Factual. Precise. Complete. But her hand, the one holding the metal container, was not steady. "I will see to it," I said. "All of it. Supplies, repairs, fuel, and the names. Every one of them. But I need to understand something, Corbin. How can you stand here, after everything that just happened, after losing half your people in a battle that was not your war, and discuss logistics as if you just finished a repair contract instead of the most desperate engagement I have ever witnessed?" She took another drink from the container and looked at me for a long time. Her one open eye was dark brown, almost black in the corridor lighting, and there was something in it that I had no word for in any language I spoke. Not sadness exactly, not anger, not emptiness or resignation. Something deeper and older than any of those. Something that had been accumulating in her species for 10,000 years of bleeding and burning, and getting up the next morning to build something new on top of the ashes. "Commander, my species has been doing this to each other for 10,000 years, before we ever met yours. We have buried more of our own kind than the Dravek have ever consumed from any world. We have fought in mud, and sand, and snow, and vacuum, and every other miserable environment the universe could throw at us. And every single time, we thought we had seen the worst of what we could do to each other, we found something worse. This is what we are, not because we enjoy it, not because we are broken, because we learned, a very long time ago, that the only thing standing between the people you love and the things that want to hurt them is your willingness to walk into the fire and stand there until the fire gives up." She capped the metal container and straightened up, pushing off the bulkhead with a wince she could not quite hide. "Now about that port engine." I understood then, standing in the corridor of my own flagship, looking at this small, battered, bleeding creature who had just saved 11 million lives with 4 battered ships, and the sheer stubborn fury of a species that refused to stay down. I understood why the galaxy feared humans. It was not their weapons, though their weapons were terrible. It was not their tactics, though their tactics defied every model of rational warfare. It was not even their willingness to suffer and keep fighting, though that willingness went beyond anything I had encountered in any other species across 3 decades of military service. It was that they had made a choice. Somewhere in their long, blood-soaked history, humans had looked at the darkness inside themselves, the capacity for destruction that exceeded anything any other species in the galaxy possessed, and they had chosen not to be consumed by it. They built civilizations on the bones of previous civilizations. They created art that made you weep. They loved their children fiercely. They laughed and sang and explored and dreamed of futures they would never live to see. And when the darkness was needed, when someone rang that old buried frequency and asked for help, they pulled it out, used it with terrifying precision, and then put it away again, and went back to being people. That was what frightened the galaxy, not a species that was dangerous. Dangerous species were common enough. The galaxy was full of predators and warriors and conquerors. What frightened the galaxy was a species that was dangerous and knew it, and chose, every single day, to be something more than what its history said it should be. The political consequences arrived faster than the repair crews. Within 6 hours of the Queen Brain's destruction, the Galactic Council's communications network was burning with emergency dispatches, formal protests, and demands for explanation from every member species that had a vote and an opinion. My inbox filled with messages from Kalori Command, each one more urgent than the last, each one asking the same question in increasingly formal and threatening language. "What have you done, Vorath?" I ignored them all. I had 11 million civilians to check on, a shattered fleet to organize, wounded crew to transfer to medical stations, and 187 names to record. The politicians could wait. They were good at waiting. It was making decisions that gave them trouble. High Admiral Tessara was the first to make her official move. She filed a formal complaint with the Galactic Council within hours of the battle's end, accusing me of violating the exclusion accords, endangering galactic security through unauthorized contact with a quarantined species, and acting without proper authorization from either my own government or the Council. Her complaint was thorough, well-documented, legally airtight, and technically correct on every single point. I had violated the accords. I had acted without authorization. I had introduced human military assets into a conflict zone without Council approval. By the letter of galactic law, I was guilty of everything she accused me of. War Elder Dushan filed no complaint. When the Wien Diplomatic Corps contacted him for a formal statement regarding the human involvement, he said 4 words: "The colony still stands." Then he closed the channel and went back to supervising the surface cleanup on Selurus 4, personally overseeing the destruction of the last spore pods with a thoroughness that bordered on obsessive. The council summons arrived 48 hours after the battle, delivered with the kind of ceremonial gravity that the galactic body reserved for moments when it wanted everyone watching to understand that someone was about to be made an example of. I was ordered to appear before the full assembly at the diplomatic station on Nexus Prime to answer for my actions. I traveled to Nexus Prime aboard a diplomatic courier, leaving my fleet in the capable hands of my executive officer, with strict instructions to complete repairs, maintain a defensive posture in the Selurus system, and provide the human crews with everything they needed. Rethus insisted on accompanying me. I let him. The boy had started this by pulling that file from the archives. He deserved to see how it ended. The council chamber on Nexus Prime was designed to intimidate, and it did its job well. It was a vast circular space carved from the interior of a hollowed-out asteroid, with seating galleries rising in tiers around a central floor, where the accused stood alone under a shaft of harsh white light. The galleries could hold representatives from over 200 spacefaring species, and on this day, every seat was filled. 200 different faces looked down from their elevated positions, a gallery of alien expressions that ranged from open curiosity to barely concealed outrage, to the quiet, careful neutrality of those who had not yet decided which way to lean. I stood in the center of the floor, in the cone of white light, and waited. The council arbiter, a Tasari elder named Suan Mahalis, opened the proceedings with a formal reading of the charges. Violation of the exclusion accords, unauthorized contact with a quarantined species, introduction of uncontrolled military assets into a sovereign system, potential destabilization of galactic peace through reckless action. The list went on, each charge read in the arbiter's precise, measured tones, each one carrying penalties that ranged from command removal to imprisonment to permanent exile from galactic space. Together, the charges could end not just my career, but my life as a free citizen. Fleet Commander Vorath Sinai, the arbiter said, her voice carrying through the vast chamber with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. How do you respond to these charges? I had prepared no speech. I had rehearsed no defense. I had not hired legal representatives, or consulted with diplomatic advisors, or done any of the things that a sensible person would do when facing the combined judgment of 200 civilizations. I stood in that cold light and spoke the truth. Guilty, I said. On every count, I violated the exclusion accords. I contacted humans without authorization. I introduced their military forces into the Selurus system without council approval. All of this is true. I do not deny any of it. I do not apologize for any of it. The chamber stirred, a rustle of whispers and shifting bodies that swept through the galleries like wind through tall grass. This was not the response they had expected. Defendants before the Galactic Council typically mounted elaborate legal defenses, challenged jurisdictional boundaries, argued technical interpretations of treaty language, and generally did everything in their power to avoid saying the one word I had just said. They did not stand under the white light and say guilty with the calm of someone who had already made peace with the consequences. I made the decision I made because every other option available to me led to the same outcome, I continued. 11 million dead, an entire colony consumed, a Dravek swarm fed and strengthened by the biomass of a living world, and ready to move on to the next system, and the next, and the next. I ran the projections. My tactical staff ran the projections. 400 separate simulations with every variable adjusted, every assumption challenged, every possible tactic explored. Not one of them produced a survivable outcome with the forces we had available. I paused and let the silence settle over the chamber like a weight. My duty, my only duty, is to protect the lives entrusted to my care. When I looked at those projections and saw 11 million deaths written in certainty across every single model, I had a choice. I could follow the law and watch those people die in accordance with proper procedure, or I could break the law and give them a chance to live. I chose the law I could live with breaking. Commander Senai, the arbiter said, the exclusion accords exist for a reason that this council has affirmed repeatedly over the past 4 decades. The uncontrolled deployment of human military assets resulted in the destruction of the Sirketh Empire. An entire civilization, with billions of citizens and thousands of years of cultural heritage, was dismantled in less than 2 weeks. The Accords were designed to ensure that such a catastrophic outcome could never occur again. The Sirketh Empire hired a human mercenary company to resolve a border dispute, and then attempted to use them as disposable assets in a campaign of mass slaughter against a defenseless civilian population, I said. When the humans discovered they were being used as instruments of atrocity, they asked the Sirketh to stop. The Sirketh refused. The humans gave them a second chance. The Sirketh refused again, and then attempted to eliminate the humans to cover their tracks. The Sirketh did not fall because humans are uncontrollable. They fell because they tried to point a weapon at innocent people, and that weapon had a conscience. That is a very different lesson than the one this council chose to learn from those events. More stirring in the galleries, I could see delegates leaning toward each other, whispering behind raised appendages and privacy screens. I pressed forward. I have seen humans fight, not in historical records, not in classified briefings, not in the sanitized accounts that get circulated at diplomatic events. I stood on my own bridge and watched 4 human ships charge into a swarm of 9,000 Dravik bioships, and I watched them win, not through brute force, not through reckless aggression, through intelligence, adaptation, creativity, and a willingness to sacrifice themselves for people they had never met, people from species that had voted to lock them away. I pulled up the tactical data on the chamber's central display system. The holo bloomed above the floor, filling the space between me and the galleries with a compressed playback of the battle. 200 species watched in silence as 4 tiny green icons dove into a sea of red and began tearing it apart from the inside, the red mass fragmenting and dissolving as the green icons wove through it like needles pulling stitches from a wound. 2 of those ships were destroyed with all hands. 187 humans died at Silurus 4. They died protecting 11 million Kalori, Tasari, and Veen civilians who, until that day, had been citizens of a galactic community that locked humanity away and threw out the key 40 years ago. Those humans did not come for revenge. They did not come for conquest, or territory, or political leverage. They came because someone made a call and asked for help, and they were the only ones in the galaxy who could give it. I looked up at the galleries, at the hundreds of faces looking down at me from their elevated seats, their positions of judgment and authority and moral certainty. So I ask this council a simple question. One question that I believe deserves an honest answer. Would you rather have 11 million dead civilians and your accords intact, or 11 million living civilians and your pride wounded? The arbiter opened her mouth to respond, but she was interrupted by a disturbance near the chamber's main entrance. The security officers stationed at the heavy doors were having an animated discussion with someone who was clearly not interested in being kept outside. I heard a voice, human, female, calm and steady, but carrying an edge that suggested patience was not among its current resources. Corbin walked into the council chamber. She had not been invited. She had no diplomatic credentials, no formal authorization to enter Nexus Prime's restricted station, and certainly no standing to address the Galactic Council in session. She wore the same battered flight suit she had worn aboard my flagship, though it had been cleaned, and the worst of the stains removed. Her left hand was properly bandaged now, the missing fingers covered by a professional medical wrap that was far cleaner and neater than anything she had worn during or immediately after the battle. She walked with a slight limp that she no longer bothered to disguise. She walked to the center of the floor and stood beside me. The chamber went absolutely, completely silent. 200 species, thousands of delegates, not a single sound. The white light fell on her like a spotlight, washing out the bruises on her face, and making her look smaller than she already was, a single human, standing in the heart of the galaxy's judgment. "I was not invited," she said, looking up at the galleries with that dark, steady gaze. "But I have something to say, and I did not survive the trip to Silurus 4 to be stopped by a door." The arbiter stared at her. "You are an unauthorized presence in this chamber. Security, remove this individual immediately." "I will leave when I have finished. It will not take long." No one moved to remove her. I do not think anyone in that chamber wanted to be the person who put their hands on the human who had just killed a queen brain with 3 ships. The security officers looked at the arbiter. The arbiter looked at Corbin. Corbin waited. The arbiter said nothing. Corbin reached into her flight suit and pulled out a data tablet. She held it up so the chamber's projection sensors could display its contents on the central hollow. The battle replay vanished and was replaced by a list. Names. Human names, written in clean text, each one followed by a number and a few words. Catherine Moss, age 31, weapons officer, aboard the Gallows Humor. She was engaged to a man named Peter, who is waiting for her on a station in the Sol system. He does not know she is gone. The chamber was silent. Darnell Price, age 26, systems engineer, Tuesday afternoon. He joined the company 8 months ago because he wanted to see what the galaxy looked like from the other side of the quarantine wall. He got his wish. Corbin read every name, 187 of them. For each name she gave an age, a role, and one detail. One small, specific, painfully human detail that turned a name on a casualty list into a person who had lived and breathed and wanted things and was now gone. Yuki Harlow, age 44, Chief Medical Officer, Gallows Humor. She kept a garden in the ship's hydroponics bay. She said they tasted like the ones her mother grew on Earth, and that was the closest she ever came to being homesick. Samuel Cross, age 38, lead pilot, Tuesday afternoon. He had a daughter named Celia, who turned 4 last month. He carried her picture in the breast pocket of his flight suit. He told me once that it was his good luck charm. I suppose the luck ran out. It took her 12 minutes to read them all. 12 minutes of silence in a chamber designed for arguments and accusations, and the kind of careful political maneuvering that keeps civilizations from colliding. 200 species sat and listened to a human woman say the names of her dead, one by one, and no one interrupted, and no one looked away. When she finished, she lowered the tablet and looked at the arbiter. Those are the people who died so that your colony could live. They did not come for glory. They did not come for revenge against a galaxy that locked them away. They came because someone made a call, and when humans hear that call, we answer it. We have always answered it. It is the one thing about our species that has never changed, not in 10,000 years of history, not through everything we have done to each other and to ourselves. She paused and let the words settle. You built walls around us because you were afraid. I understand that. I do. My species has given the galaxy plenty of reasons to be afraid of us. We know what we are. We know what we are capable of. We carry that knowledge like a scar that never fades, and we look at it every day, and every day we choose to be something better than what that scar says we should be. That is what you never understood about us. That is what the Accords got wrong. She put the tablet back in her pocket. I am not asking you to tear down the walls. I am asking you to put a door in them. Because the next time something like Solurus 4 happens, and we both know it will happen again, the next time some species out there faces something it cannot survive alone, someone is going to have to make the same call that Commander Senchai made. And the difference between 11 million dead and 11 million alive should not depend on whether the person holding the communicator is brave enough to break your law. She turned and walked toward the exit without waiting for a response, without waiting for permission, without looking back. No one stopped her. No one spoke. The only sound in the vast chamber was the uneven rhythm of her footsteps on the stone floor. One step firm, the next favoring her injured leg, echoing off the curved walls until the heavy doors closed behind her, and the silence swallowed the echo whole. The council deliberated for 6 hours. I was not present for the deliberation, having been escorted to a waiting area that was comfortable enough to be polite, but secure enough to remind me that I was still, technically, under charges. Rethus waited with me, sitting in a chair too large for his lanky frame, saying nothing but radiating a quiet confidence that I found more reassuring than any words could have been. When I asked him how he could be so calm, he shrugged and said that he had read enough history to know that the right thing and the legal thing were not always the same thing, and that civilizations worth preserving eventually figured out the difference. The verdict came as the station's artificial daylight was shifting toward evening tones, the light in the corridors dimming to the amber frequencies that simulated dusk on 100 different homeworlds. The arbiter summoned me back to the chamber floor and delivered the ruling with the careful formality that the council used when it wanted to disguise a political compromise as a principled decision. The charges against me were sustained. I was found guilty of violating the exclusion accords and acting without proper authorization. My formal service record would carry the conviction for the remainder of my career. However, in recognition of the extraordinary circumstances of the Silurus engagement and the preservation of 11 million civilian lives, the sentence was suspended indefinitely. I would retain my command. There would be no imprisonment, no removal from service, no further penalty beyond the mark on my record, which, as Rethus pointed out afterward, would probably end up being the most impressive thing on it. And the exclusion accords themselves were amended. A new clause was added, drafted in the dense legal language that the Council used when it wanted to do something significant, while making it look as boring as possible. The clause stated that in cases of verified existential threat to a civilian population, where no other viable military option exists, a senior field commander, holding the rank of fleet commander or equivalent, may invoke emergency contact protocol to request human military assistance without prior Council authorization. The invocation would be subject to post-action review, and the commander would bear personal responsibility for the outcomes. It was not an open door. It was a crack, a narrow gap in the wall that the galaxy had built around humanity, just wide enough for a signal to pass through when the darkness closed in, and everything else had failed. It was not enough. I knew that. Corbin knew that. Everyone who had watched 4 ships charge 9,000 knew that. But it was more than had existed the day before. And in my experience, that is how change happens. Not in grand gestures, in cracks that widen over time. I returned to the Silurus system 3 days later. The cleanup was nearly complete. The Dravik bioships had decomposed rapidly without the Queen Brain's sustaining signal, their organic structures breaking down into clouds of inert biological matter that the system's stellar winds were already beginning to disperse. Within a month, there would be no trace of the swarm that had nearly consumed an entire world. The colony was intact. The cities were still lit. The people were still alive. Corbin's 2 surviving ships were still in orbit when I arrived. The Pretty Penny had been patched with materials donated by the Allied fleet. Her hull now a patchwork of Kailori alloy plates, Tessari composite panels, and Vihen armor segments that gave her an even more cobbled-together appearance than before. A ship built from the generosity of species that had once voted to lock her builders away. Her companion ship, the Long Weekend, had fared better in the battle and required fewer repairs, but she too bore the scars of what they had done behind the second moon, marks that would never fully fade no matter how many times the hull was refinished. I contacted Corbin on the private channel one last time. The Council amended the accords. There is a clause now. A door, as you asked. I heard. It is a very small door. It is a start. Starts are what we do best, Commander. It is the finishing that takes the work. Her ships departed the next morning through a subspace rift that opened and closed in the space between 2 heartbeats, a quick, clean puncture through normal space that left no trace of the vessels that had passed through it. Before she left, she sent me one final message, text only, no voice, no encryption. Next time, do not wait until you are losing. We work better with prep time, and tell Rethus he still owes me that drink. I stood on the bridge of the undying flame and watched the space where the rift had been, empty now, just stars and vacuum, and the faint glow of decomposing bioship matter drifting in the stellar wind, like pollen from a dying garden. Below me, Silurus 4 turned slowly in its orbit, blue oceans and green continents, and the silver threads of rivers catching the light of the local star. 11 million people going about their morning routines, eating breakfast, sending their children to learning centers, starting their work shifts, arguing with their neighbors and laughing with their friends, and falling asleep at night without thinking about how close they had come to never waking up again. Living. Because 4 ships full of people who owed them nothing had traveled across a galaxy that feared them, to fight a swarm that outnumbered them by thousands, for a colony full of strangers. I opened my personal command file and added Corbin's frequency, not in the classified archive, not behind encryption protocols and Tier 0 authorizations and layers of bureaucratic protection. I put it in my personal contacts, right alongside the frequencies for my executive officer, my tactical staff, and the commanders of every allied vessel in my fleet. Ready, accessible, 1 signal away. Rethus appeared at my shoulder, looking out at the viewport with those 2 large eyes that had seen more in the past week than most officers see in an entire career. What happens now, Commander? Now we rebuild. We repair the fleet. We honor the dead. Ours and theirs. And we prepare. Prepare for what? I looked at the stars beyond the viewport. Somewhere out there, in the vast dark between systems, other threats were gathering, other swarms, other dangers, other moments when someone would face the same impossible choice I had faced behind the moon of Silurus 4, staring at projections painted in red and holding a frequency that the entire galaxy had agreed should never be used. For the next time someone needs to make the call, I said, and for making sure that when they do, the answer comes faster. The galaxy built walls around humanity because it was afraid. I understand that now, in a way I could not have understood before I watched Corbin's ship accelerate into a dying trajectory with a calm voice and a steady hand. Fear is a natural response to something you cannot predict, cannot contain, cannot fit into the neat categories that civilized society uses to make sense of a chaotic universe. Humans are chaos. They are unpredictable and adaptive, and ferocious and gentle, and reckless, and patient, and everything in between, sometimes all in the same breath, all in the same person, all at the same time. But fear was the wrong response. I know that, with a certainty that goes deeper than logic or military analysis or political calculation. Standing on my bridge, looking at a living world that should have been dead, I know it the way you know the heat of a star or the depth of the void between them. The right response was never fear. It was respect. Respect for what humans are, for what they can do, for the choice they make every single day to be more than the sum of their scars. Corbin told me that her species has been doing this for 10,000 years, fighting and dying and building and loving and getting up each morning to do it all again. I believe her. I have seen the evidence written in the hull of a ship that crossed a galaxy to answer a call from strangers. The galaxy locked them away and hoped they would stay quiet. They did. For 40 years. They waited. Not because they were broken or beaten, or had forgotten what they were. They waited because they understood something the rest of us were too frightened to see. The walls were never really about containing humanity. They were about making the galaxy feel safe. And safety, as Corbin proved at Silurus 4, is not something you build with walls. It is something you build with trust. I saved her frequency. I will use it again. Not out of desperation next time. Out of respect. Out of recognition that the galaxy is a dangerous place, and that the most dangerous things in it are not always the ones you should be afraid of. The door is open now. It is small. It is narrow. It has conditions and restrictions and review processes attached to it, but it is there, and I suspect that the species on the other side of it has been waiting for this moment with the same patient, stubborn, terrifying determination that sent 4 ships against 9,000 and did not flinch. They answered the call once. They will answer it again. And when they do, the galaxy will learn what I learned in the fire above Silurus 4, watching a short, battered, bleeding woman stand in the hall of judgment and say the names of her dead until the room had nothing left to say. Humans are not the monsters the Accords made them out to be. They are something the galaxy has no category for, something older and stranger and more remarkable than monsters. They are people who know exactly what lives inside them, who have looked into the darkest corners of their own nature, and who wake up every morning and choose to build a world worth living in anyway. That is what the galaxy fears. And that is what the galaxy needs. I closed the viewport, turned from the stars, and went back to work. There was a fleet to rebuild, a colony to protect, and a future to prepare for. A future that, for the first time in 40 years, included humanity. The door was open, and I intended to keep it that way.